My father really likes the saying, perfect is the enemy of good. And I'm not always a fan of this sentence, especially when he says it to me, because he's usually trying to tell me that I'm kind of overdoing it and you know, should be done with something or should let go of things. And I definitely think that there's a certain amount of knowing inside yourself as an artist when you've done all you can for a project, if you've kind of reached your limits. But that knowing can take time to develop. I mean, sometimes you don't know. Um, and sometimes time is the best thing for a project, which can be really hard because there's always this pressure to finish something and to, other people want to see it and they don't quite understand, especially if they're not filmmakers, how long projects can take. And I'll give you a couple of examples with the short film for Acid Test. It took us a year just to edit that short film. And that was mainly, I think, partly because of the way that I wrote it. I wasn't exactly sure how to write the script in the way that best kind of represented the hyper cutting and dynamic cutting that I wanted to have in the final video. And so, kind of relying on my documentary background and filmmaking background, I basically just wrote it linear and in a way that I knew would get the coverage that I needed to have the raw material to then edit the project that I wanted to edit. But then when we were editing it, and Sharad Patel, who shot it, was editing it with me, we kind of got stuck in editing it the way that it had been written. And we had this like 19-minute long, very kind of dragging short film. And I was like, this is not how I wanted it to be, but we couldn't quite think about how how to do it any differently. We were kind of just like in this rut. And we had been editing it for several months, and I was like, you know what? I think we just need to move on, and this is how it is, and let's move on to sound design and go from there. And this was over the summer, and I think I took a vacation or something. I don't know, but there was a conference that I went to by a local Houston organization, Swamp, at the time, where I met this woman who consults on short films and had written a book about it. And I kind of thought, well, maybe we need her opinion because we had been showing it to people and everybody kind of had ideas, but it nothing really clicked. And she said, you're pacing it like a feature film and but it's a short film and it needs to live and work as a short film. And for some reason, just that one phrase kind of helped unlock this this kind of rut that we were in, where Sherrod then put together what he called the Bob Fosse cut. And it was this very kind of dynamic, fluid intercutting, especially in the opening of the short film, that really set the tone for what was later going to happen. And I was like, yes, like now. And all of a sudden it like all came together. But without that time and without that, external kind of perspective that unlocked this thought process, we were kind of stuck. And again, this phrase, perfect is the enemy of good, it's like I wasn't necessarily looking for perfection, but I knew that the project wasn't going to be successful as a project with the 19-minute dragging version that we had. And not that it was terrible, it just it just wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't what I thought we could get to. And so I just needed to kind of give it that time. And another kind of totally different example is that I wrote a novel years ago when I was in the midst of trying to figure out what it was, whether I wanted to still be a filmmaker when my kids were young, and it was very difficult to go out and shoot because they were babies. I wrote a novel, and the novel itself wasn't hard to write, but then kind of workshopping it, like I just was never fully finished with it. And there's this fun movie, I think it's called The Wonder Boys with Michael Douglas, where he plays this author who's like constantly writing his this book, and it's like 1,000 pages, and he just can't ever get to the end, you know? And I kind of felt that way about this book because I workshopped it with two different writers groups. I had sent it off to agents, and novel writing is not my wheelhouse. I mean, I was an English major, but writing it is different than script writing. But 10 years later, maybe more, I finally was like, I need to get this project off of my to-do list. Like, I need to be done with this project. And I went back and I reread it, and I completely changed the ending. Like, completely, because my life experience and my creative journey over 10 years had changed the way that I approach things. And, a lot of the novel stayed the same, but there were these critical moments that I completely changed. And I finished it, and I just decided to self-publish it and put it up on Kindle. And again, I I don't know how it could have been otherwise. It is the way that it is. But again, time can help you figure out where you need to be. But the flip side of this is that time will always give you new ideas. Every time I read a script or go back and look at a project, I have a new idea of how I could have done it differently. You will always have new ideas. That's just how we are as artists. And this is where my dad's phrase kind of haunts me, because at the end of the day, having a finished project that's out there and available for people to see, or that's going to festivals, is better for you as a filmmaker and for you moving on to the next project than 10 half finished projects, in some kind of state of development or production or editing or whatever. And it's, I think, getting to the end, getting to the finish line where you finish a project for better or worse and you just put it out there, I honestly think is the best thing you can do. And, there are people who will go back and revisit projects, and based on feedback or time or whatever, they will redo it. I mean, we were talking about this in class. George Lucas did that with his Star Wars series. He was like, well, there's new technology, so I'm going to change up the visual effects and edit things, and even though the original series was very wildly popular and successful. So, you know, you can always fall back on that as well. If you truly want something to be changed, you can update it and change it and kind of re-release it. But I do think it's important to finish it. But it's this interesting gray area as artists where you kind of have to figure out when it's done, or when it's done for now and you just need to get it out there and move on to the next project.